What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny Bush and Fantasy Points Graham Barfield coming at you to preview the official preview of the 2022 running back class. We've spent 3 months talking about these guys. This is where we close the book before we give you guys our final rankings and talk about these guys with the running back expert himself, the creator of Yards Created. We just recorded last night with Matt Harmon of Reception Perception with the wide receivers. We figured we'd get the running back expert on the channel for you guys here today. So Graham, how you doing today? Feel free to introduce yourself, plug anything that you got going on.
Yo, yeah, nice to meet you guys. I'm Graham. Yards Created is my thing. Everything's up on the site, man. We have the full database updated for the 2022 class. So any standard subscription to fantasypoints.com will get you that database. And yeah, I'm going to rip through a couple articles here. Later this week, we'll post them. And then obviously I have a big post-draft breakdown where I go through the whole class, talk through landing spots, all of that. So yeah, it's a fun time, man. The draft is here. It's always one of my favorite events of the year. So I'm really pumped that we're finally actually getting some like real life tangible stuff going on, not just takes in the ether. I'm pretty sick of takes in the ether. I'm ready for some real life stuff here.
For sure. We've been hearing months on end, Twitter, everywhere, people talking about, this RB class. And I'm finally happy, excited to get the closing thoughts on the channel, get, the expert himself to really talk about this. We'll just call a muddy group.
That's the best way to describe it. The best way to describe it. It's a money group for sure.
Yeah. So if you guys enjoy this video, as always, hit the like button, comment any of your thoughts down below, subscribe to the channel if you are new. I believe on Fantasy Points, the $50 package is the one that they can go acquire to see Yards Created and all the stuff that is available. Graham's work will be listed in the description down below as well. But before we get into it, got to hit the intro. All right, so the first question for you, Graham, is basically a background of what Yards Created is and how it kind of identifies which running backs could produce for fantasy. And if you want to, take some victory laps on guys that you've spotted before anybody else knew it, feel free to just kind of break down your process.
A few victory laps and also a few not so victory laps. I don't know, so what would those be? Reverse laps? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, Yards Created is a process I started 7 years ago now. And I started in 2015. And basically what I try to do is chart what happens, like how many yards the offensive line blocks, and then after the line does or doesn't do its job, those yards get accredited to the back. So basically it's like, if you think of it in like terms of like second level yards, that's probably the best way to think of it. So like when the back gets through the hole, what happens? That's essentially what I'm doing. And I'm charting missed tackles forced in terms of speed, power, elusiveness. I'm also watching every passing down play. I usually end up charting 6 games for every back that I do. So it usually shakes out to be about half the season, maybe a little bit more. In the case of like Dameon Pierce, I end up just watching like all their carries because they only have like 5 per game or something stupid. So it's not a full season because I'm one man and I just, I don't have the time and bandwidth. But I did a study on this last year. Yards Created turned out to be have a higher correlation to career fantasy points than pretty much any metric you could look at in terms of like just career receiving yards per game, career rushing yards per game, any metric in the combine. Again, the combine is like total crapshoot in terms of just trying to find signal. But yeah, some big hits were Kareem Hunt, Joe Mixon, Christian McCaffrey. Some not so big hits, Darrell Henderson. Also love Joe Williams, if anybody remembers Joe Williams. I love Kenny Dixon, Danny's guy. Derrick Henry, I think I was pretty low on Derrick Henry too, a little too low on Henry. Yards Created came out too low on Henry, but I think that's just because he had so many carries. He just had like 350 carries or something like that. But yeah, definitely have had some big hits, some swings and misses for sure as well. And hopefully we'll have some more hits than misses than this class, because after RB1 and RB2, it's dicey, guys.
Yeah, and just, talking about that, realistically, at the running back position, you want to be swinging for the fences. You want to be swinging for those hits. So for all the misses that there can be, the fact that you're able to cite, Joe Mixon, Kareem Hunt, Christian McCaffrey. Like those are some absolute league winning type of assets where if people were able to get for the cheap in their rookie drafts at that time, I mean, you're reaping the benefits, reaping the rewards at this point. And I just wanted to kind of talk about that. You actually wrote in your recent article that there's a 0.32 correlation from yards created from college and projecting forward to the NFL. Obviously, as you mentioned, highest of any single recorded metric that you can find out there. So the fact that you're able to put in that work, the fact that your results speak for themselves, I mean, kudos.
Appreciate that, man. Yeah, and even then, like 0.32 is like extremely low. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, I always think of it as like we're trying to look through keyholes. Like we just are trying to find like the smallest amount of like tangible useful data that we can. And at the end of the day, I think yards created definitely helps that, but it's definitely far from the full picture, and it's nothing. It's not perfect, but it's definitely done a good job for sure. A better job than I expected of predicting future fantasy success for sure.
Yeah, the 50% hit rate I like to call is like the casual fantasy player can hit about 50%.
Yeah.
Us as degenerates and researchers and stuff, we're hitting like 57%. So we're fighting for 7%, and it takes all that work to get that 7%. But that 7%, like you said, could be a Kareem Hunt, it could be a Joe Mixon, who weren't first round NFL draft picks, slam dunks like Christian McCaffrey maybe was. So the fact that you're beating draft capital, which I believe is a 0.3 correlation, is definitely pretty solid. We kind of alluded to it already. What are your thoughts on this running back class in general? We know the top two guys have been the top two guys for a while, Kenneth Walker and Breece Hall. And then after that, Isaiah Spiller was kind of in that tier before the combine, and then he kind of tested not as great. Is this running back class after those two, maybe 2.5 guys, a crapshoot, or is it, a bunch of guys that can do a bunch of different things?
I think it's a bunch of guys who can do a bunch of different things. Maybe not so well, but it's a bunch of guys. Hall and Walker are great prospects, man. I mean, I think they're obviously two very, very different players, but they bring a pedigree to this class that we desperately needed, because after them, it's pretty dicey. And then, I've been saying this to the, few people that I talk to every year, just getting their takes on a running back class, and it just seems like everyone's RB3 through 8 is a totally different order, and I'm so excited to see what happens on day 2 and day 3 of how the NFL values these guys, because like you mentioned, draft capital, even though we make fun of these teams from making bad picks all the time, like it's still pretty strong correlation in terms of like our game, like what happens in the future. I'm really excited to see how it shakes out for sure. Isaiah Spiller, man, I'm not surprised. He said he didn't test well. I'm not surprised he didn't test well. His tape was slow. He was a slow player on tape, so I was not all that surprised. He ran 4.6? 4.6?
Yeah, like 4.64, I think. So the difference between him and another guy like Javonte Williams last year, who also ran in the 4.6s at his pro day, you see a visible difference in game speed between those two guys, is what you're saying?
Massive. I mean, it's like two different games basically. I mean, Javonte was my guy last year. Yards created was really high on him. He was the number one back by a mile in terms of like missed tackles forced. I think he was top of the class in yards created too. I'd have to double check. But anyway, Javonte was my guy. Isaiah Spiller's not close to that. I mean, Spiller was 3rd percentile in yards created per attempt, which is really, really bad. He was out of the 12 or 13 guys I charted in this class, he was 11th out of 12. So not great. Pretty low in missed tackles forced as well. He was 3rd fewest in the class in terms of missed tackles forced. I think he's one of those guys who's like a jack of all trades, but master of none. Like he's competitive as hell. Like he definitely fights through contact extremely well. Pretty good pass catcher too. Texas A&M used him in a lot of like key 3rd down situations and like red zone situations, which was huge. And he was a great pass catcher for sure. Great route runner. I think he's probably the best pass catching back in this class. Maybe Rashad White and James Cook have an argument to be made there too. But yeah, Spiller, I just don't think he's got the juice to be anything more than like a change of pace guy on early downs and short yardage, which will cap his ceiling obviously for our game.
For sure. I mean, if we're looking at it, obviously us being a dynasty channel for the most part, like Isaiah Spiller's name has kind of been out there all season. And I mean, I'll trust your tape watching over mine when it comes to running backs. I like Spiller, but I mean, I see definitely the flaws in terms of obviously that athleticism showing, in terms of overall that nuance of playing the running back position, which he kind of hasn't figured out yet.
I just pulled out my notes. I said he has some like ridiculous catches. I made a note of like in the game he played against Colorado, he had like a 3rd and 8 that extended the game. He had the game-winning touchdown. Like they dialed him up in some crucial situations. They would use him on like downfield routes too. Like they would run mesh concepts where he'd be the wheel guy. And you know, he's great in that role, but I just don't see him as like a guy we can really rely on and project forward as like a 3-down player, because he is fairly limited as a runner.
Yeah, I think the tough thing too with Isaiah Spiller is from an age perspective, he's got like 3 years on Rachaad White and, you know, Pierre Strong and some of the older running backs in this draft class. Isaiah Spiller hasn't even turned 21 yet. So there is maybe some hope for NFL teams that he could develop into more of a nuanced runner. But like you said, the athleticism could be a problem for him. 2 guys, I mean, you kind of touched on them already, that the athleticism was not a problem for. Just give your kind of thoughts on the top 2 dudes, Kenneth Walker and Breece Hall, maybe how they stack up relative to previous, top tier running backs.
Sure. Let's start with Breece Hall, because I think he's like kind of everyone's RB1. I've seen a few people shift to Walker towards RB1 here in the last couple of weeks, but yeah, Breece is all around an awesome player, man. He can force missed tackles with speed. He can, beat you with his elusiveness. He's got a nasty jump cut, and he is very, very competitive in short yardage. He's like, what is he, 215, 217, right? He runs like he's 225, 230. I mean, the dude is a load. I felt like watching him, there was a number of plays that stood out to me where he just left yards on the field. Like patient backs like toe this line between being overly patient and hesitant. And in my opinion, I think Breece was hesitant at time for a player of his pedigree who has his athleticism, and he got away with it because you can kind of be, when you're Breece Hall and you run 4.38 and you're 217 and, you've got all the moves that you could want, you can be overly hesitant at time, especially against that level of competition. But I saw a few too many times where he would just wait too long, or the hole would be right there in front of him and he would just kind of duck in between a defender and just kind of run in the back of his offensive lineman. That's not something you want to see from an extremely high level prospect. And I think that's something that he can be coached out of. So Breece to me is a very, very strong prospect. He would rate behind, if you want to just put arbitrary rankings on it, he would rate well behind Najee, Javonte, and Kenneth Walker for me in this class. If you want to combine the last 2, he would be definitely above ETN though. So I don't think I've seen people give him kind of like this JT, like Zeke Elliott, billing. I'm not there. I think he's a really good prospect, but he's not in that group. Kenneth Walker was freaking awesome. Like he nearly broke yards created. I didn't expect anybody in this class to have 90th percentile yards created. No, Kenneth Walker did it. He did it in fashion, man. 5.86 yards created, 92nd percentile. Over the last 7 years, led the class by a mile in terms of missed tackles forced per attempt. The dude's a magician. I mean, he's like an artist back there. I mean, he's nimble, runs a lot like Joe Mixon, like a lighter version of Joe Mixon. If anybody's spent time watching Joe Mixon knows that he's just got like the nastiest cuts, not only in open field, but behind the line of scrimmage. Kenneth Walker is like the epitome of like what you want from an inside zone runner. He sees the lane, makes his cut, explodes upfield. I mean, he is amazing in terms of his zone running. But obviously the big question we have with him that we don't have with Breece is the pass catching. Caught 13 balls at Michigan State. I watched all of them. I mean, he didn't do much besides like just simple swing passes and checkdowns, but he did catch the ball away from his body, which is one thing I look for. He doesn't let the ball get into his body. But other than that, man, I mean, it's a projection. And, with Walker moving forward in his rookie year and years to come, ultimately we would just want him to be able to catch like 25, 30 balls, just a couple of checkdowns, maybe a couple third down plays, and maybe you can build a repertoire from there. But obviously that's the huge question that we have with Walker. And I totally understand why people have Hall over Walker as RB1, simply because Breece is a more accomplished pass catcher.
So adding on to that, obviously, as you mentioned, like Walker was the better pure runner. Obviously, Breece has that receiving profile. If you're on your dynasty team, for example, when you're focusing from a fantasy football outlook standpoint, where are you kind of prioritizing? Obviously, again, landing spot draft capital is going to end up taking a certain effect. But if you're just player X versus player Y, you don't know the draft spots right now. How are you kind of balancing that receiving edge that Breece has versus that rushing edge that Kenneth has?
Yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, I'm going for guys that have the standout, like, not only was Walker yards created standout, he tested extremely well at the combine too, man. I mean, he ran 4.38 as well, right? 4.4.
Yeah, low 4.4s, and he came in bigger too than we thought. I know I personally thought, I'm like, hey, is this guy going to be 203, 204 coming into the combine? I think he weighted 211 or something like that, or 209.
Yeah, I think he was 210, somewhere in that range. So yeah, man. I mean, he tested well too. I know everybody got on Breece's time, but Walker was right there too. I have done 3 rookie drafts so far. I'm a big skin in the game guy. Like, I don't really like giving takes that I don't personally do myself. I haven't had the chance to take Breece over Kenneth Walker, but I would. Or excuse me, I haven't had the chance to take Kenneth Walker over Breece, but I would. I took Walker at 103 in a rookie draft last night. Yeah, man, I think he's 101. I think he's going to go way earlier than people think too, and it would not surprise me if he went ahead of Breece.
I have money on it to say that he might, because I do think the NFL is going to covet, like, because I agree. I wasn't all that high on Kenneth Walker when I first watched him, not as a runner. I clearly was like, dude, this is the best runner in the class, but it's almost like Devontae Smith last year. Not like, because Devontae Smith was the guy that was going to be the outlier. If anybody can do this at 160 or whatever Devontae Smith weighed, it's going to be Devontae Smith. Kenneth Walker, if anybody can do this with like a 0 in the receiving category from a production and a profile standpoint, it looks like Kenneth Walker is going to be the guy to bet on to do that. So I'm starting to rise a little bit more on Kenneth Walker. I'm seeing a million people like you and a bunch of other people telling me that this guy might be not a generational type of runner, but like up there. He's definitely one of the better runners that we've seen in the last couple of years. And initially my stance was, hey, I'm not taking Kenneth Walker until Drake London, Treylon Burks, Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall, Malik Willis in a super flex format are off the board. But now I'm not really going to blame anybody for taking Kenneth Walker 102, 103, 104, wherever they want to take him.
Yeah. Well, this wide receiver class, man, I mean, it's like pick your poison too. I mean, I have Garrett Wilson at 1, but then after that, I mean, you can make an argument for anybody. I think you can make an argument for Jameson Williams. We can make an argument for Treylon Burks. So the receiver group, and I'm sure you guys got into this with Harmon too, it's like extremely deep in my opinion. I mean, it's not like, there's no Chase, there's no Devontae, there's no Waddle, but it's a good group. This running back class gets real freaking dicey real fast. So yeah, I think Walker, just in terms of this class and the way everything's kind of laid out, I think Walker gets boosted up just because of the scarcity of the position.
I mean, talking about, potentially going earlier than we expect. I mean, I wouldn't be at all shocked if 25th pick comes along. The Buffalo Bills are looking for some more juice on that offense. I mean, hey, that'd be fun pairing them with Buffalo, with Josh Allen and them boys.
Oh man,
you don't have a speed element to your offense really at all, because even like Moss and Singletary are 4.6 guys. Even Diggs, who's like elite wide receiver, he's not a complete burner. You don't really have anybody outside of like Gabriel Davis, maybe that stretches the field for that team, and you have a power running back basically in your quarterback. So that would make a ton of sense to me. And I do, like I said, I have skin in the game that Kenneth Walker is the first running back off the board, because I do think NFL teams are really going to covet his skill set. And I don't think they look too much into like receiving profiles like we do in fantasy football. So after those 3 guys, and you kind of touched on all 3 of them, most people have different RB3s. If they don't like Spiller, RB4s. If they do like Spiller, there's just a massive group of dudes between Zamir White and Brian Robinson and James Cook and Rashad White and Pierre Strong and Damian Pierce and Tyler Algier and Kyron Williams, whoever some people like as the best running back after that top tier or that top 2 and Isaiah Spiller. Does anybody in that group stand out to you? And we kind of talked about one of them already, but I'll let you kind of pick and choose who you want to talk about in that 3rd or 2nd tier of running backs.
Yeah, it's Damian Pierce for me, man. We could talk through a lot on Pierce in terms of the way he was used. We were talking off air a little bit too. Just he's a 0 in terms of production. Like, I mean, the laundry list of running backs and receivers, too, that we have attached ourselves to because their film is so good. and their efficiency's fine, but have zero production that haven't panned out is extremely long. I was going back and forth with someone on Twitter about this. Like, we got like Alvin Kamara, Tony Pollard recently, of guys that like have, very, very little career production of like maybe 35, 40 rushing yards per game and a little receiving production that panned out. That being said, man, Dameon Pierce's efficiency in terms of yards created, everything was really, really strong. 4.53 yards created. That's 43rd percentile, but pretty strong for a guy who only got like 7-8 carries a game. He was second in this class in missed tackles forced per attempt, which is really strong and really good in terms of yards of per route run. He was at 2.1. That was right behind Rashad White and James Cook, so he was third in that stat. Pretty much anytime he got his hands on the ball, he made something happen. Extremely competitive runner. I think he's got better agility than people would probably initially expect. He's got better juice too. I mean, he's not Kenneth Walker or Breece Hall. He's not going to run 4.38, but I mean, he's got some serious juice inside of 5-10 yards. The question is just like, how's the NFL going to see this guy? I mean, are they going to see him as a change of pace back, like kind of how he was at Florida, or are they going to see him as a guy who can actually play all 3 downs? I personally think he can play all 3 downs. I think if you gave him that role, I think he would excel in it. That being said, I'm not NFL teams. I have just my opinions, and at the end of the day, they're worth a little, but not that much. So it's going to be real interesting to see where Pierce goes. But he really, out of this whole group, I just going through all the charting and crunching all the numbers and stuff over the last couple of weeks, I was hoping and waiting for somebody to pop, and I think it's Pierce. But I just have no idea where he's going to go. Wouldn't shock me if he went in the 3rd round. Wouldn't shock me if he went in the 6th.
And it's funny when we mention like a name like Dameon Pierce, because I mean all the analytical bros are going to be like, oh, 23-year-old running back, no production, I don't want. But then when you actually apply the context, you say, okay, listen, like I can't explain why he didn't get the production, but all I can tell you is when he does get the touches, he's able to produce with them.
Well, it was the most bizarre thing too, Danny. Like he would rip off like a 12-yard run and then literally not play another snap until the next quarter. It was the most bizarre thing. And, you mentioned they had him playing fullback. They had him playing fullback as like a lead blocker a ton for their other back, who was not as good. Their quarterback.
And their quarterback, too, on a
Oh
lot
my
of plays.
God.
Richardson.
Dude, their quarterback play was so bad last year. I mean, it was impossibly bad. Their play calling was bad. I mean, just the whole setup was bad. And we talked about this again off air. Like this is now the 3rd or 4th guy that Florida's had that's a really good player that had no production. Van Jefferson, you mentioned. Kadarius Toney should have been a star in college. Like he should have been a dominant star, and he wasn't until his last year because they didn't know how to use him. I don't think Dameon Pierce is that level of athlete as Kadarius Toney. I don't think he's that kind of playmaker, but he's really freaking good, and he should have been used way more in his last years. But again, he wasn't.
And it's funny because when we're talking about, guys that were misused in college, like if we're looking at a guy like Dameon Pierce, like if he lands in a spot like Philadelphia where there is a ton of opportunity there, obviously they don't like what's going on with Miles Sanders, a lot of volatility to his game. Obviously with Kenneth Gainwell, he's a nice compliment, but you don't want him being that main carrier between the tackles on a year-to-year basis. You get Dameon Pierce, 3rd, 4th round areas, probably about the expected draft capital. You put him in a situation like Philly. Obviously, me saying that with a bunch of Cowboys jerseys behind me, it doesn't look too ideal. But I mean, it just is a match made in heaven for me.
Yeah. I think he's going to be a guy who goes into a rotation like that. And honestly, this is kind of like something that's like on the top level surface of this class. There's not many good landing spots. The Bills, the Falcons, maybe. The Falcons would have a ton of opportunity.
Texans for volume.
Yeah, Texans for volume. Jets, maybe. I think Michael Carter will probably always have a role there in the next couple of years. Yep. But yeah, the Bucks, I mean, maybe. And Leonard Fournette's got that job this year, but I don't think they're going to be too enamored with Keyshawn Vaughn in the next couple of years. So yeah, I mean,
they seem, as a Bucks fan, they seem a lot higher on Keyshawn Vaughn than they used to be. So it does, like, it wouldn't shock me if they took nobody, but Jason Light was actually asked point blank, would Vaughn and Fournette and the other guy that they have there, I think they brought back Bernard, would that stop you from drafting another running back? He's like, no. If they, I know they've met with Spiller a ton. I know they've met with Hall a ton. I know they've met with a bunch of the even high-end running backs. I don't think that it would shock me if they took a running back in the second or third round.
Well, I mean, Keyshawn Vaughn was in Bruce Arians' doghouse for the last 2 years, and he's gone now. So maybe they're going to give Vaughn another shot. But yeah, that's a good point. I mean, the Bucs would be sick, but Fournette's going to block them for whoever, maybe the next 2 years. So it's a weird year for running backs for sure.
Yeah. So speaking on that, Zamir White, Brian Robinson, James Cook, Tyler Algier, Rashad White, Pierre Strong, I know has a cult following. Kyron Williams, who tanked his stock at the combine, but had some decent film, I would say. Does anybody else stand out in that group? Did anybody perform well in certain areas? Some guys not perform well in others, but maybe worth a shot.
Yeah. We'll circle back on like James Cook and Rashad White, maybe Algier too, but Pierre Strong, Brian Robinson, Kyron Williams, Isaiah Spiller, and Zamir White were all in the bottom 20th percentile in terms of yards created per attempt. Jerome Ford was 22nd percentile. Algier was 26th. No, the answer to that is no. I like Brian Robinson a little bit just because he can do everything.
That's why I like Algier, which is why I just cringed there. It's because I think Algier can do everything. He's physical. He's got a decent receiving skill set. He's got the size. 77th percentile math bomb relative athletic score. Not terrible. He's my RB4 as it currently stands right now. And even that, I'm not like enamored with him. He's like a mid-second round rookie pick at best, probably.
Yeah. Algier is interesting too. I mean, the thing with Robinson, he's immediately gonna like.
He's so old.
He's really old. But if let's say the Falcons wanted to draft him and immediately give him like 60% of the snaps, like they could do that. You know what I mean? Like he's the best pass. And I go back and forth on this all the time, and I write about this all the time. But like pass blocking is, finding a guy who's actually good in pass protection coming out of college is very rare. Brian Robinson's actually that guy. He gave up just one pressure out of like 30 pass blocking snaps that I charted. I mean, he was really strong in terms of his pass blocking. Very physical runner. I think he's got better burst than people give him credit for, but he's nothing special. Algier, same thing. Good inside runner, very, very physical runner, but he has like almost no elusiveness. Fine pass catcher, but nothing special.
He's also good in protection for what it's worth too, because he was a former linebacker. That physicality really shows up. I tend to think he might have a little bit more burst than people give him credit for, but he's still not gonna wow you with elusiveness or anything like that. Yeah,
exactly. James Cook's interesting. He's just really small. He's just really, really small. Like 195, 198, and he looks like he's 175. But he posted second best in this class in terms of yards created per attempt. He was up there in yards per route run too, second in the class. Efficient back. They lined him up against corners too. He would run actual wide receiver routes. Maybe one of the only guys in this class, him and Rashad White both were one of the few guys in this class that actually lined up at receiver and took on corners. But he's just so small. Like, if we put 15 pounds on James Cook, maybe he'd be a guy we could perhaps trust for a 3-down role. But I just don't think he's going to be anything more than like a change of pace guy, unfortunately.
That's unfortunate. It's tough because we are in a sad reality at some point where a lot of these smaller guys, like they have to go to the exact perfect situation that'll let them get the volume. And realistically, from an NFL standpoint, they see, am I going to get this, 215, 220 pound inside the tackles type of runner that can put up, a 4.5, or am I going to get, there's a 190 pound wiry guy that, he's going to run a 4.4, but realistically from a size speed standpoint, just give me the size at that point.
Yeah. And Cook's, Dalvin Cook, his brother, might be the best zone runner of all time. I don't say that lightly. Dalvin Cook really might be the best zone runner of all time. James, you can tell he has picked up a lot from his brother. He is fantastic in zone. That being said, he just isn't built like his brother, man. I really would worry about giving him more than 8 or 10 carries.
For what it's worth, his ideal landing spot is the team behind me, I think, because we know Tom Brady will use him in the passing game. And I think they like him too. And I know they like big school running backs.
I like that spot a lot. I also like the Bills. They've been sniffing around on pass catching backs. Obviously, they tried
McKissick.
And I think they brought in Cook a couple weeks ago, and I made note of that. So I think Cook to the Bills would make some sense too.
Yeah, I mean, that would be fun. You're talking about offensive insulation from a value standpoint. I mean, are there any other running back landing spots, period, that you would want attributed to Josh Allen and a potential 30+ point per game scoring offense?
Yeah. And I think that they want somebody that Allen can check down to. Like Singletary's nothing special. Zach Moss has always stunk. I'm sorry, but he's never been good. I've never understood with him. But yeah, they've needed a guy with some juice and some pass catching chops. And I think, Cook, maybe even Rashad White too would be interesting for them.
Yeah. Speaking of a guy with the last name White, I'm curious what your thoughts were. You kind of talked about Zamir White already. I know he has like a little bit of a resurgence in the draft community lately. I think the further he's away from the field does him better because he's not a very good player, in my opinion.
Nope.
But Zamir White, I've seen people say he's like the RB2 in this class, the RB1 in this class. I think we're getting I think the draft should happen at the beginning of April. Yeah, I think the draft should happen at the beginning of April so that we don't get these takes mid-April when we're all sick of talking about Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker. Zamir White, can you please dispel the narrative that he's potentially one of the better running backs in this class?
Yeah, man. I'm still flabbergasted. I'm perplexed. I'm flummoxed by Zamir White RB1. My goodness. Yeah, it's a sad trombone for Zamir White. 0th percentile. 0th? 0th percentile in yards created for 10. Literally dead last out of the 90s some odd backs I've ever charted. Man, look, he popped his ACL twice. The poor guy. I mean, I didn't see any burst. Obviously, Georgia's offensive line was fantastic. He was a pile mover. Just very little burst. Was very low in terms of missed tackles forced. He was second fewest in this class in missed tackles forced, and they rarely used him on passing downs. So he really didn't get a chance to produce very much in terms of that. But yeah, man, I've been saving this take, and I'll probably write it somewhere. But if he didn't go to Georgia, then people would probably have him as like a 6th or 7th round pick. But
yeah, funny thing too about his passing game usage, his pass blocking grade according to PFF is 19. So for a big back, he really can't do anything on third down.
Yeah, man. It's tough scenes for Zamir White. I think James Cook is way more interesting.
That athletic testing from Zamir White is the most shocking thing I've seen in a while. Because I had a tweet written out and I deleted it because I know Zamir White has a little bit of like a following. I tweeted, I'm like, is Zamir White the worst 98th percentile math bomb athletic score that we've ever seen?
He might be, man. I think. Curious to get your guys' thoughts on this. That the track in Indy it's brand new. The field was brand new. Everyone was running fast.
Yeah.
I think that has something to do with it. But the other thing is like there's a huge difference between running fast in a straight line for 40 yards and running when you're trying to make defenders miss and pick through holes and bob and weave and be physical. I mean, it's two different games. It's two different terms of athleticism. And in terms of his game film, last year's Zamir White just didn't have it. Maybe another extra year removed from the ACL, he'll get some of that burst back. Maybe. We'll see. I know Sony Michel dealt with a ton of injuries his final couple years at Georgia and into his rookie year too. And he finally kind of got back to where he could have been maybe these last couple of years. Maybe that's what Zamir White needs. But for right now, he's at the bottom of my rankings. Yeah.
What's with knee injuries at Georgia?
Every
it's
Georgia
insane. Running back
it's something in the water.
White, Sony Michel, Nick Chubb, Todd Gurley. Like literally every Georgia running back has major knee injuries. The last question before we get out of here that I have for you, my favorite sleeper in this class is Bam Knight from NC State. He's a guy that I love as like a 3rd round rookie pick for people because I think he has some of the best feet of this entire class. So you as the yards created guy, I'm curious to see if that was something that if you've charted him or not, something that popped out to you, because when I watched him, play, I was like, this guy can make people miss on a dime. According to PFF, he's the 3rd most elusive back in this class behind Dameon Pierce on a per touch basis. And then Kenneth Walker at number 1, basically. Zonovan Knight, when he ran the bag drills at the combine, Daniel Jeremiah was like, that is outstanding because his feet are just phenomenal. So what did you think of him if you've charted him? And then who do you have as like your number 1 sleeper back that people should throw darts at in the 3rd, 4th round?
Yeah, I did not chart Bam Knight, but that's interesting. I know Cosell liked him a little bit too. We have a prospect guide where Cosell has written up like I don't know. He literally locks himself in his office for like weeks on end and just watches like random 6th-round guys. But yeah, he watched Bam Knight. I think he liked him a little bit too. I don't know why my computer's freezing right now. I was going to pull that, but maybe I should add Bam Knight. Outside of Pierce, Algier is interesting, but I don't think he's really a sleeper. Keontae, what's that guy's name?
Keontae Ingram from USC.
Ingram.
We had Angelo Fantasy on, and he waxed poetic about Keontae Ingram as well. So maybe I do have to add one more running back to my watch list, because I didn't end on watching him till I saw where he got drafted. But you're now like the 2nd or 3rd person that said Keontae Ingram is interesting.
Yeah, he's interesting just because he's a really good pass catcher. I didn't chart him. I just, obviously just going through the numbers and watched a couple games just to kind of be familiar. But yeah, Keontae Ingram's interesting for sure. He's got some juice. Obviously he was blocked out by Bijan at Texas and then went to USC as a transfer, but he's interesting for sure. I don't know, man. There's like 24 guys in this class like that are all like 5th, 6th round grades. I mean, it's unbelievable. You could put your name on anybody.
I think there's going to be a lot of Khalil Herbert types, like guys that are good for 3 to 4 games when the starter is out. Type of guys from this draft class. Maybe you get the odd Ramondre Stevenson type of player, which I think could be like a Pierce if he backs up Miles Sanders his 1st year in Philadelphia and then goes on to take over the job his 2nd year. I think that's what we're getting on the high end with most of these guys. Outside of the top dudes, I don't think we're going to get this year's Elijah Mitchell or this year's James Robinson coming out of nowhere and commanding workhorse volume.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Scott Barrett, my guy, he said it perfectly. There's 13 Alexander Madisons in this class. That's what it is. I mean, there's 13 Alexander Madison. There's 13 Khalil Herberts. I mean, it's definitely the most out of the 7 years I've done this, man. It's definitely the most like bizarre group for sure.
What about a guy like Kennedy Brooks? Obviously, he's an older prospect, not a receiving profile. Like, what did you make of him? Like, if you've gotten to him as a runner?
Yeah. The thing is, I think he's got some domestic violence issues in his past. He missed all 2020, so I think he's probably going to be off some boards. I've done 3 rookie drafts so far, 4-round rookie drafts, by the way, and he wasn't drafted in any of them. Yeah, I mean, obviously super efficient. I mean, he averaged like 8 yards a carry in his career, something like that, 7 yards per carry. But yeah, I don't know if he'll be drafted because of his past.
Yeah, he's the Mark Walton of this class. If we're gonna
do
that, to make those connections. Anyway, yeah, that guy was classic. For what it's worth, my comparison for Zonovan Knight is actually Khalil Herbert, so that's why I brought Khalil Herbert's name up. So, and Khalil Herbert was a guy that I had a top 7 running back last year, right behind Elijah Mitchell at RB6. So, I don't know if we're gonna get a guy like that unless it's on a handcuff or the starter went down, so they have RB2 value because of the volume type of thing. So, Graham, again, appreciate you coming on. If you guys enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, comment any of your thoughts down below. We're closing in on 10,000 subscribers. I think we're like 200 away right now. So if you haven't already done so, we're trying to get to 10,000 before the NFL draft starts. So if you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button. Make sure to check out everything that Graham is doing. Like we said at the beginning of the video, it's like $50 to get yards created. You get the archives, I believe, in that. And you also get, you made reference to Cosell's work. You also get that, I believe, as a result of that. But I'll let you kind of plug anything one last time.
Yeah, standard subscription gets you yards created and everything on the site, basically for season long. So like all of our best ball rankings, any season long stuff that you're doing. So all of our like waiver wire in season pickups that you need, that'll be included. So it's not just yards created; you get a ton of value for that $50 season long subscription.
Yeah, I would buy it just for yards created, but you do get a lot of other things as well.
You're too
for sure. I mean, we each have been following yards created for a while. So, I mean, the fact that you're getting all that value for $50, not only obviously yards created, but the whole access to the fantasy point site. You're talking about, best ball rankings. I mean, Dr. Edwin Porras, we've had on the channel a couple of times. He's super sharp when it comes to entry analysis. So, yeah, definitely familiar over there.
Cool.
Yeah. So, that being said, make sure to check out our sponsors over at Underdog Fantasy. Check out the Patreon for more Dynasty rankings. We made reference to them throughout the video. Peace out, guys. We'll talk to you soon.